exactly what I was looking at. I've done a little bit of work on masculinity within myself, so there was an interest there. But it wasn't the masculine component, the initiatory part of ourselves. That's important as well. But it was more the structure and the order of how we can conduct ourselves, and how that supports our growth. The banks of the river, that can hold us. That was missing a lot in these spiritual circles, and that was because through my own journey, I'd rejected it. I'd had that. I suppose it was. I felt the pressure, really strong pressure, coming through a military family to be that orderly, disciplined, regimented sort of person growing up. And then when I realized I didn't need to do that, I pushed it away quite a lot. But then later on realized how much that brought to my life and reclaimed it again. And then I looked around at the time, the circles that I was in, it was all peace, love, and unity and all that. But everybody was sitting around all day, not getting anything done. And it just felt like such a waste, because these were such capable, beautiful people, but they weren't doing anything with the time other than talking about how much the world was not how they liked it to be. So, that's where this strand of my work started to pick up pace then. It's like, well, you've got so much capacity already. Let's just reclaim the things that you already knew when you were younger. So it comes out in various ways, but I think that sums it up.
And just to take this back a bit, I've just noticed that when I was recording the introduction to this, it didn't press record. So I've caught that part of what you've just said. So just to let the viewers know, this is an interview on David Schofield with his entrepreneur work. And I'm just sort of interviewing people who bring a more unusual perspective to being an entrepreneur that isn't all about the money and the marketing and the tricks of the trade to create a $6 coaching thing or to get rich quick, but it's also inclusive of our wholeness. And so, I'm interested in what you do now. What components do you bring to your entrepreneur, to your approach to coaching, that make you unique and that help you to help other people be successful in a way that is so satisfying at the same time as enriching and financially conducive as well?
Yeah. Okay. So various things, and there's an ongoing evolution of how these things come together into some unified form, and perhaps they won't, perhaps they don't need to. But I've got a lot of martial arts training in my background. I've worked in a lot of different businesses, set up my own businesses, got a master's in business management, so sort of went down that road quite a long way. And also the more mystical component as well. I use numerology as one of the key tools I use. Now, under all of that, and you talk about wholeness, for me, it's about unique life purpose. There is a unique puzzle piece, unique life purpose. So we all have our own puzzle piece as part of the big jigsaw, and we all need to do that. Otherwise the jigsaw doesn't look right. Okay. And none of it works. So for me, other than a lot of the background stuff that I've done has been around how to manage myself, how to manage organizations, right? So that's not leading the organization though. As far as I'm concerned, the leading of the organization comes from what that puzzle piece is. So we really need to dig deep into who we are and what we uniquely can bring. And then we don't need to be some highly trained business leader. We just need to know what that thing is and to do that, right? It's good to be able to manage yourself well and to know how to work with people and all of these things. But that unique selling point comes from that unique life purpose, as far as I'm concerned. That's how you differentiate yourself in a market which is becoming increasingly competitive, and not at the same time, because there's no competition for you when you're coming from your uniqueness, right?
So how would somebody come into to find this puzzle piece, this unique purpose that you mentioned was essential for the whole to function? How would somebody get to know that? What tools you have, and what's your system?
So it's ultimately a contemplative process. I think contemplation is second to none in terms of self-understanding in the inner world. In the outer world, it's facing challenges and seeing what your limitations are. So in a world contemplation, I use numerology because it's it's very, very old, and it seems to underlie all the other things. So I want to go back as basic as possible to the underlying code of all the other esoteric systems that come through. That's my sense of it. And in the outer world, martial arts and pushing yourself to do uncomfortable things like going and having difficult conversations, things of that nature, to find out where your limits are, to maybe step a little bit beyond that, but then to just be aware where that perimeter is around you, so you know where your growth is outwardly, right? So it needs to be both. It needs to be outward and inward growth. And yeah, like I say, that tends to then define you. It tends to shape where you fit. It helps you to orient yourself to everybody else around you, to your environment. But it's a long process.
So how did you mentioned numerology? How was that influence the process of finding this unique selling point, this part of your purpose? How do you use numerology?
So there's various parts of the numerological system that I'm using. So the major two parts are lower self, higher self. And if you believe in reincarnation, the lower self aspect is what you came with from last time, from previous lives, innate capacities that you've already got. You may fracture those away through conditioning, through trauma, in which case it's a good idea to reclaim them. And that's the wholeness work, right? And then there's the higher self, and that's where your evolution is. So it's great to do the wholeness stuff, to come back to yourself and to reclaim who you really are, but it's not where you're going to evolve and grow from. So the higher self aspect is, we talk about this, 4 roads to walk, which is effectively 4 different people within you. Now, in our society, we all well know that it's difficult to deal with one person in one body. So dealing with 4 in one body is not impossible in our current mindset. So we try to squash them down into this one more manageable piece, preferably the piece that's best for the economy, or so we think. And then everybody's life, most people's lives, is a process of unraveling those 4 again. So these 4 distinct characters, different for every person. Even if you've got the same archetype as another person, there'll be a very unique way that you understand it has come through in your life. And it's the combination of those 4 that makes you unique. So we say there's 4 roads. The 4 roads are the destiny, approach, ultimate goal, and link. Destiny is what you can frame that as what you're here to do. The approach, how you're going to do it. The ultimate goal is where you get your greatest fulfillment in life. And then the link, once learnt, when you learn all 4 in sequence, once you learn the 4th, it brings the others together into what takes you toward a uniqueness. So it's a long process. It's not an overnight thing or a weekend thing.
That's quite a lot of information in a very short soundbite. So could you break that down a bit? Like, we've kind of prepared mine, in the background of this interview, and I wondered whether you could just slow that down and just reflect back what mine were, and we can kind of chew on that to sort of, for those listening, how that's helped me. And those reflections can help me to kind of really define myself and know what I am and I'm not, so that then I can focus in on my true purpose.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that's what helps people to become good entrepreneurs, is knowing what you are and knowing what you're not. So that, especially, you mentioned also those fragmented aspects of the lower self. I can then bring that in as we're talking about the interview, and we can kind of demonstrate just how effective this system is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of information in a short period of time, as I say. Long process and lots of conversations need to be had. But let's focus in on a couple of pieces. So, lower self, the soul urge number is like your egoic desire, the thing you really, really want in life. And yes, if you can do that, that's great. It's like the itch that if you can scratch it, you've got the luxury of scratching it, you should, but not the expense of your growth, right? And for you, that's the number 5. And the number 5 is something that comes up in a lot of spiritual circles, a lot of circles where people are seeking freedom and adventure, and they want to explore and expand and all of that. It's very prominent in those circles, the 5. It's the archetype of the adventurer. Now, the adventurer wants to be out on the front lines of life, meeting all the people, having all the experiences, indulging all the senses. And as a result, it can overindulge as well. So the shadow side, if you like, it goes a bit too far, takes too much, and then, it can unstick itself. It's the number of addiction in that way. So very easy to become addicted with the 5. But it's boundless, and that's the thing. And it doesn't want to feel restricted in any way. Boundless mentally also. Boundless in its ability to learn new things. 5 is is able to bring all of the many strands of things together and unify them and understand them in this, in unity. So very, very powerful number, that. But where it's placed for you, it's important, as I said. If you've got the luxury of indulging that, then great. If you don't, and you're being called into the higher self, the evolution, then you need to leave it alone. So that's where, that's one of the things that comes up a lot. But this is really important to me. Yes, I know, but it's not going to help you to grow ultimately. Whereas,
yes. Can I just respond to that? Is that one of the things I've seen in the new age is a tendency to indulge that, and to believe that indulging is the work, and expanding into the indulgence, and almost making an industry out of that expansion without actually addressing the core wounds, the underlying patterns that I now am addressing and moving through, and whilst thinking that I was actually addressing them through the indulgence work of rage. I think that's been really important for me to actually step up in becoming more professional, in being more focused in what it is that I do and how I can support people, rather than being constantly trapped in expansiveness.
Yeah, it's great to be able to reclaim that freedom, but it's then to learn the constructive use of it. That's where most people get stuck in the new age, right? So yeah, please hear you saying that, because it is a difficulty that a lot of people are facing right now. So moving on to the higher self, and in contrast, and you've actually got an interesting destiny approach, which I'll focus on both of those, because in numerology, the numbers that are next to each other in sequence, so 2 with 1 and 3, 3 with 2 and 4, they tend to either conflict. Well, they will conflict probably to start with, until you learn to understand that you've got to balance the paradox of them. And then they can be really good complements to one another. So you've got 2 and 1 as your destiny and approach. So what you're here to do, 2 is the sensitive, the archetype of the sensitive, and the lesson there is sensitivity. It's all about cooperation, being part of a group, being the power behind the throne. It's very much a secondary energy. It's the primary feminine energy. It's not masculine.
Would you say that's a supporter role, a sort of guide, supporter, facilitator, or is that too much of a physical way of expressing that?
No, certainly supportive. Yes, it's depending on the nature of the facilitation that's going on, and this is just writing off all the other numbers at the moment, just focusing on the 2. It was just the only thing we're dealing with. If it was facilitating from quite an authoritative position, then it wouldn't be suitable. But if you were facilitating from sort of the background, and really everything you were doing was seen and you were having a huge impact, but perhaps you weren't getting the acknowledgement that the big bold leader would, then that would be the sort of thing that a 2 would do, which is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of 2s, especially in this world. And when we're talking about entrepreneurship as well, where we're told we have to be the big bold leader at the front, and we're going this way, tally ho, and the 2 can't really do that. They tend to bring more confusion to a situation than when they try to lead them clarity.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm often a catalyst for people to find their own leadership, their own number 1 in their life, their own power. And so I'm thanked for being there along the way. And for my ego, it's like, I want more acknowledgement. You see how some other people in their work are, they're waxed, they're eulogized about. And it's been very humbling to know that I'm often just a poke, or the way that I hold space is enough. I don't need to be doing too much. It's actually less is more. That's what I find.
Yeah, certainly. And I've got the 2 in that position as well. And it's absolutely correct for me.
Very humbling as a bloke.
Indeed. But for you, this interesting paradox, because your approach, the way you're supposed to achieve that, is through the 1, which is the primary masculine initiating force, right? It's the archetype of the innovator, and the lesson is independence. And there's various parts of that independence. So when I say independence, I mean, as far as Jung would, what's Jung's word? Individuation. So, be able to sort things out within yourself. You don't need anybody else. So that, and also financial independence, self-employment, really absolutely essential for 1 approach. But once that independence has been sought, from that place, people perceive you as a leader and will follow you from that place, right? So it's the leader. You've got to lead to be the power behind the throne, which is a fun paradox. And there's lots of these things coming up all throughout numerology, and it's a way to, I suppose, to link up the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It's for us to recognise the binary nature of things and to try and reconcile that.
Well, it's really interesting. One of my first ventures as an entrepreneur, away from just being a consultant, was to create a network where I taught people to find their innate authenticity. And it was like a way of business networking. That this was back about 12 years ago, just before the Breakfast Club started up, before LinkedIn and Facebook started. I was kind of advocating this authentic way of sharing and being, whilst also holding your business alongside that and bringing that kind of heart to the work. And it definitely gave me the role of a soft touch facilitator up the front, leading the way on that way of working. Like I say, before even Facebook and LinkedIn had taken off, let alone all these kind of, franchise breakfast clubs that businesses have now used to do just that. So I never capitalized on that. I never then was at the sort of lead of the wave that then commercialized that. I was kind of leading into my indulging into that. I couldn't commercialize it, and it was too vast a concept to try and make financially viable. So I guess that's where I lack that discipline to commercialize it and actually to be at the forefront of this wave that has gone on for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I suppose it's I can't say for sure whether that was a lack of discipline or whether that was just being the two. And ideal situation would be for you to be leading in the background and for somebody else to be on the front lines, right? Because for me, in the various things that I've done, I am absolutely amazing at managing all the stuff internally, right? Customer service, looking after clients, looking after customers, getting all the pieces that need to be put together, talking to suppliers, everything inside, solid, right? But I'm not the one on the front lines going in, handing out flyers and trying to drum up business. I don't do that very well. I have to really push myself to be able to do that. So the ideal orientation for a two is to do everything else and to have somebody else out pushing the boundaries, especially somebody with a 5 or a 1, right? Or a 22 and an 8. Those numbers are particularly strong business-wise. Now, luckily, I've got some of those numbers elsewhere, so I can draw on them. But it's 2 is the main thing that's going on for me, and it's difficult to juggle that. So leading, yes, I would say is apt.
Are we
working team.
Sorry, are we then talking like the law of attraction then? That if you just embody your two-ness, and are just totally sort of but do the two within the kind of embody your masculinity, but don't try and push it on anybody. It actually creates that result that you were desiring anyway, of finding those things. So it's actually, really taking the law of the 2 to the inward 1, to the masculine expression, but not pushing that masculinity on anybody. In fact, it's the more mature aspect of the masculine that holds space, that witnesses, that is entrusted as a keeper of wisdom, that has no agenda to thrust that out into the world beyond holding and being present with it and holding the integrity.
I would say work through sequentially. Yes, it's all rings true, and it'll be very specific for you how these things come together. The word embody is very, very important in terms of the 2, because I work with the system works with the 4 elements as well, the 4 classical elements: earth, air, fire, water. Destiny corresponds to earth. Approach corresponds to water. To water. So body, physicality, and emotions. So your destiny, embodying the 2, absolutely. It's being that primary feminine component to reality is very attracting. It's very receptive, right? So if you can embody that, things will be attracted to you. And whilst just within the 2, if you're operating in behind the scenes and not trying to claim the limelight and not trying to be out on the front lines, then you'll be taken care of through life very nicely as a result of that, right? But then we step into the approach and leading that 2 forward. Yeah. And doing that from an emotional place. That could be an interesting line of inquiry for you. How can that masculinity, that emotional masculine, come through to support the embodied feminine?
Wow.
Mm.
So it's like it is a form of inner marriage, really, in a way.
Yeah, it's a saying that can be a lot of conflict there, but there can be a lot of harmony between the two as well.
It's working to kind of very well. It's the classic thing that's on the planet at the moment. What's going on between men and women, and what's going on within each man and woman on their masculine and feminine polarities, really. Would you say that's quite active in entrepreneurs as a rule of thumb, really, with these forces like the first and the second position of their whatever they got for the first two numerological points, the destiny and the way of
Approach.
delivering, the approach? Would you say what do you typically see as those two numbers? Can you give some more examples of people's delivery and approach, and how that might be a part of their masculine and feminine inner dance, really?
Well, there isn't a typical, and to say the configuration is different for everybody. But in business, there's a lot of ones, fives, eights, and 22s. So the one is the leader, the innovator. The five is the pushing the boundaries of things, being out the explorer. The eight is the boss, power, wealth, status, very traditional. And that's an interesting point because very much rejected in New Age circles, that idea, although it's not, again, same with the proper use of freedom, proper use of power is fine, right? If you can learn to do that. And 22 is the master builder. They're the one that takes the world by the throat and changes it for those who can't, right? It's really the institution, the world changing energy. So those four are really they come up a lot in the circles that the clients that I'm working with. As far as what's going on with entrepreneurs more generally, I tend to work with people who are not wasn't a conscious effort on my part, but I seem to be working with people who are trying to balance the two, the masculine and the feminine, reconcile those. But everywhere else, it seems to me, anyway, in my experience, what I've seen through running a Facebook group and having all those people in there, is that they're either one or the other a lot of the time. I really struggle to see the other side really badly.
So they're polarizing really against the opposite and projecting it outside of themselves on life or on you or on the protagonist in their lives, rather than owning that process within themselves.
Increasingly is what I'm seeing, and I like the way Spiral Dynamics looks at this. And again, like we said before, it can be overly intellectualized, that system, like all of them. But it talks about the first tier of consciousness, which is made up of several levels. For those who don't know what Spiral Dynamics is, the last two at the top of the first tier are orange and green. Now we can see those so typically everywhere. Orange is your typical Western success-oriented, goal-oriented, achievement business types. That's our center of gravity, as they say in Spiral Dynamics, in our society, I would say. And the one below that's quite strong as well. But then moving above that, we move into more values-based and open and expansive. That's green. And whilst it's a step forward, within the first tier, every other worldview, every other level is considered to be stupid and wrong from where we are, right? And the green is typical in your charities and your hippie circles and whatnot. So this is where I found myself a lot. I was surrounded by people with great values and very smart and aware, but they'd rejected the orange stage before that, which is all about order and structure and being able to get things done in the world. So what I hope to see and what I want to have a part in is moving people to that second tier, which is, I like to think I've got a toe in, at least, where I've reclaimed a bit of that structure. It's the first time when you move into the second tier where you can reclaim everything that came before.
Yes.
So you can be values-based and expansive and aware, but also get things done. And that's really important, I think. And the stages beyond,
And not be afraid of earning money in the process, not being afraid of generating income in order to give yourself the ability to be true to your principles. And not have to sell out, say, to the 9 to 5 or to life, not have to compromise yourself to the system.
Yeah. And this is where it's really useful to look at the numerology and to recognize that ideas that have been around for a long time aren't just inherently bad and evil, like the New Age. And green would reject a lot: power, money, status, all these things as bad. But really, that's the territory of 8. The 1 wants to do that stuff as well. The 5 wants to get in there as well, as long as it can remain free from any restrictions regards it. Yeah. The 22 is here to change the world entirely. So we do need power, but that's often rejected, right?
It's like money isn't inherently evil. It's the love of money, and it's power isn't inherently evil. It's the love of power that is
Yeah,
inherently
yeah,
corrupts people. And I think that's the mistake. A lot of people coming through the new age, they kind of reject money, they reject power, and therefore, like you say, they're rejecting their masculine, or they're rejecting an aspect of their feminine, and it then acts out in the business. It acts out,
mhm,
or it then kind of becomes part of the shadow of what's stopping them from being perhaps more successful and earning more money.
yeah. Creates more imbalance in the world and makes it harder for everybody as a result of that as well. So overall, things seem to be getting a lot better and a lot worse at the same time. And who knows which way it's going to swing at this point. But all we can do, as far as I'm concerned, is continue to balance ourselves out, continue to make as responsible choices as possible.
So how have you done that? How have you balanced yourself out? What's been like the turning point for you around harmonizing your first two numbers, or your masculine and your feminine? What's been your major breakthrough around that?
Well, suffering, mostly, as for all of us, seeing the consequences of poor decision making, and whilst I don't think it's really possible to compare yourself to others, that's been a big part, and that's something I've had to resolve. People say, "Oh, well, I could have been in this place and that place compared to that person, this person," all that. That played a big part in my life, and I've stopped doing that, I think, for the most part now. But yeah, suffering as a result of the sins I've made in the past. And I think that suffering goes on forever as we realize deeper and deeper levels of the self-betrayal that's gone on, really. So for me, martial arts has been a huge thing. Through a period of great suffering, that was one of the things that came out of that. Then it was chosen suffering as opposed to imposed on me, as a result of my past actions. It's interesting that you choose to go to a room twice a week and beat yourself up. It seems to lessen the amount of punishment you seem to receive from the world and from the universe.
It's like a controlled form of suffering that actually serves you. So it's harnessing the wisdom in that suffering. And that suffering is actually just discipline, really, in a way of seeing the consequences of your choices.
Yeah, indeed. And it used to be such an embedded tradition of rites of passage and initiation to create that suffering as early as possible, as soon as you were ready, so that you could be more capable of being in the world. But obviously that's faded away massively. And a big part of what I'm trying to find my way forward with here is to how do we bring that back in an effective way? Because all the attempts I've seen at that have really been very much watered down, and that's a lot to do with legalities, because we can't, as we used to take people out to the woods and hang them upside down by hooks, can't do that sort of stuff anymore. So what is appropriate though? What is ethical? What is effective? That's a big question that I haven't got an answer to at the moment.
Well, I think we live in an age where the consequences of that, that wound, that initiatory experience or wound, was like a fast track pushing through the suffering to find that truth, that humility, the true essence of who you are behind all the conditioning. And the rites of passage kind of were a way of throwing off the ancestral burden, the karmic burden that would carry, that would cause a life of suffering, a life of misuse of our power, a life of being constantly confronted with our shadow and causing pain and suffering to others, and not being able to achieve our potential. And yet initiatory experiences are a way of raising our perceptions of those blind spots and of pushing us through them, so that we'll always know them, but we'll never be run by them. So they become almost, the humility is actually knowing how to hold your power wisely, so that your power doesn't get used against you, but actually is a medicine for you and therefore the world. And I think that takes, it's a bit like being able to hold that the discipline of taking a beating, as you termed it. It takes a lot of grappling to get to that point, a lot of discipline, which, like you said, the 5 as a personality, like I got, doesn't inherently come naturally. To really build the daily embodiment, the daily discipline, the daily willing to grapple with the shadow, to see all those places. And I think that you have a system that helps people to see that process, that grappling process, that initiation with the shadow, that coming to terms with what are the healthy aspects of masculinity that we've missed out in the new age, the healthy aspects of making lots of money and of being in your power, but don't cause suffering to other people or yourself, but actually enhance the lives of other people with that sort of benefit.
Certainly. Yeah, I agree.
That was a bit of a wrap up, really, in some respects. But as we're coming towards the end of the interview, it's been such a blessing to hear your vulnerability, and to hear you share the struggles as well as the sort of knowledge that you have. Because I think as men, we can get very much into our systems and our knowledge and use them as a way of, overriding our vulnerability. I'm sure that will stand you in good stead for what, as you go forward and share this beautiful work with people. It's a great enabler, the fact that you can share yourself like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No other way. Authenticity. Yeah.
So anything, any last points, and then you can share like how people can find you on social media and on the web. Any sort of final wrap up points you just want to add to that discussion, or say about your work, what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah. So various strands, as I say. Trying to be as entrepreneurial as possible. I'm setting up martial arts schools in my locality, but I've got a 12-month program which is running as a beta at the moment, which has got as part of that weekly coaching, content to work through to help become this holistic human and entrepreneur that you're talking about. So bringing in all the 4 elements, all the aspects of ourselves, working with the numerology, a bit with the tarot, a lot of stuff from my social enterprise background as well, and ongoing coaching, content, retreats, and regular deeper dives into different subjects as well, bringing the external experts in. So that's the big package at the moment. And people can find me. I'm renegotiating my relationship with social media. However, they can reach me at david.p.schofield@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing about your work, and also for some of the reflections that have been very helpful for me as well.
No worries. Thank you for the invitation.
Cheers, David.
See you later.